So, what have we missed? What have you missed, Neil?
What have we missed, Joe?
Huh?
You weren't here last week either.
I was.
It's as if there were no news. Nothing happened.
Nothing happened, yeah. Well,
sure, we won't do a show.
You know, part of the problem is that...
Sorry to anyone who's only just learning. Because, not everyone gets a heads up.
Yeah, what?
We have some fans who just follow us.
Yeah.
On Twitter and so on.
Okay. Well, they... part of the problem is that... for a lot of people who haven't been paying attention and are progressively kind of starting to pay attention because things are going pretty squirrely on the old blue marble type thing.
Those are a bit new to this.
Well, yes, it's all new to them in a certain sense. Oh my God, how did, they just woke up and it's like, why is this happening? And I got to talk about this, and this is news to me, and it's not really news to us. It's news to us in the details, but not in the overall dynamic in terms of how the whole thing's playing out. Because we've been talking about this for 20 years, literally. Like we've been predicting this long before time. And we were, a voice in the wilderness, and justifiably so in that sense, where it was like we were.
You especially, you're a dinosaur.
We were like way ahead of the curve.
And no one's one of 10 people, writing about stuff.
No one's
20 years ago.
Yeah, no one's listening to you way ahead of the curve. They're like, yeah, freaking Doomer. What are you doing about Doomer? It's all fine. Look, everyone's fine, and it was fine, relatively. I mean, everyone was good. I mean, if you didn't care that much, if you thought that wars always happened, and warmongering and liars and politicians and stuff, well, that's the way it always is. But.
What can I do about it? 'Twas always so.
Yeah, just ignore it, But it's the extent to which this kind of pathology is taking hold among people in positions of power, and how it's manifesting more and more overtly, that is shocking some people,
Well, it's come into their homes, into their personal lives.
Yeah.
As a general sweep, this is what happens periodically in history, that the state, in whatever form, whatever ism it's using to express its intent, gets into your life. The personal becomes the political, as ultra radical feminists were, sloganeering back in the 60s. We got to make the personal political. That's how we'll change the world. And that kind of sentiment is
make it personal,
manifest today in all the various isms.
Yeah. Well, there's the past couple of weeks, we weren't here last week, but a week ago, more than a week ago, the UK Telegraph started running something they called the lockdown files, which were a bunch of WhatsApp messages primarily between Matt Hancock, who was at the time during the COVID nonsense, was the health minister in the UK, and this was there's a journalist who. She works for the Telegraph. She's also an independent journalist, or whatever. But she wrote a book with him last summer, and as part of writing that book, she kind of co-wrote the book with him on his. And it was a glowing kind of like report or commentary on his time as health minister. And she got access to a lot of the WhatsApp messages in order to help him write this book. Right, at the WhatsApp messages from the time between him and other ministers and other people involved, others, the chief medical officers, etc., etc. And
so he voluntarily shared.
Yeah, he gave them to her. Yeah, and but he said with the proviso that, listen, don't make this public. Don't share these messages. A lot of messages here. We're only going to select some of them for my book. The rest is kind of private, right? But she then reneged on that kind of non-disclosure agreement because she realized that it was she's consistently said since then that this is far more important because it's in the public interest, because this whole COVID business and the policies that Hancock put in place were directly impacted like you just said, it was personal for the individual that came into their homes, right? So she said, listen, these have to be made public because they expose what was really going on. Here's one example of it. If you go to the Telegraph, telegraph.co.uk, they have still, it's been like 10 days now, they have the lockdown files as their main story, and they update it with more new information. This one example is where Matt Hancock basically said, can you see it there? Can you scroll down, Scotty? Yeah, okay. Go on down a bit through the actual messages. There you go. So, no, next ones. Anyway, so these are ones between Damien Poole, who's a Department of Health Media Special Advisor, so a spin guy for Matt Hancock, how to present what was going on to the public, or what they wanted to tell the public. He's talking there about certain MPs not happy about the prospect of lockdowns, etc., and what should we do about it. And Matt Hancock, as you can see there, responded to him saying, "We frighten the pants off everyone with a new strain. And we don't want to complicate it with Brexit. We want Brexit to take the top line here. We want to scare everybody with a new strain." And they said, just down below that, when do we deploy the new variant? Now, he's talking there about deploying the new variant. What does that mean? I mean, this is one of the variants of COVID at the time. And he's talking about it as if it's some kind of weapon in his hands that he can use to scare the pants off people. I mean, it's loaded with a sense of fakery, essentially, or at least disingenuousness about the seriousness of the threat of this new variant, and it was actually being used to scare the pants off people, to get them to
proper behavior change, as his advisor says,
to get them and all the politicians to get in line with lockdown, to stop pushing back against lockdown, stop questioning lockdowns. Because, I mean, if you look at these files, basically it was pretty clear that Matt Hancock was on a power trip, and he was seeing it as him as the health minister. It was going to be his triumph. I think he actually said that, or his victory, when he would get the vaccine rolled out, and he would get all the different policies that he put in place. It was all about personal power and personal recognition for him. So that's one example of not a lot of people really. I mean, it's made the rest of the media, apart from the Telegraph, has in the UK very little. In the US, like nothing. Around the world, around the rest of the world, nothing. But even in the UK, nothing. BBC, Guardian, etc. Very little, if any, reporting on these files at all, on the content of these WhatsApp messages and what they say about this psycho nutbag, Matt Hancock. And he is a psycho nutbag. There's something very, very wrong with that person. But he's an example of the kind of people who are selected into positions of power in Western governments these days. They are, almost by definition, they have to be psychologically deranged in some way. They have to have something. Are we wanting them, as we would say in Ireland? There's something not quite right about that guy. And if you did a proper psychological analysis of him, you'd probably find some clinical diagnosis, maybe some version of narcissistic personality disorder, or even psychopathology. The other one here is just to quickly do this, because we have to get through a bunch of stuff today. Here's another one from the same files. This is there was a guy in a town called Bury, who was, I think he was a local councillor or a politician, member of Parliament for Bury, and he was against lockdowns. And Matt Hancock, in these messages, it becomes clear from the WhatsApp messages that Matt Hancock said that he would threaten this guy with withholding plans, or stopping plans for a learning disability hub. So basically a centre for disabled people in his constituency. And Matt Hancock was going to say to him, listen, if you don't get on board with the lockdowns with what I want, we're going to, you're not going to get your constituents. We're going to withhold facilities for disabled people in the UK. So there's morality for you. There's a sense of conscience and morality amongst people like Matt Hancock and other people in government, in the UK government. And you can apply this across the board, that's how, that's the level of the extent of their moral compass, let's say, or where their moral compass is pointing. Mm-hmm. They are willing to use anybody, including the most vulnerable in society, and to deprive and increase the suffering of the most vulnerable in society in order to get what they want. And these are the people we're listening to. These are people that the average member of the population was looking to for guidance, and saying, well, if they say that's what we should do, then they've got our best interest at heart, right? Therefore, we should do what they say. And quite clearly, they don't have your best interest at heart. And it's not even that they don't care about. They're not apathetic in that sense. They're not neutral. They clearly, at times, have your worst interest at heart. They're willing to go there, if you know what I mean. They're willing to to punish and make you suffer in order to get what they want.
Hmm.
So, but again, like, amazing. No,
You-
very little, if any, reporting on it in the rest of the media.
Okay, that's that side of the story. And the other one is, well, is there much take up among ordinary people? I think there has been in the UK. Not as much as you'd think, though. You'd think this would be a social media takeover discussion of this, but in context, I think I'm understanding why not. There's an apathy about it because there were as we went through it, there were even more egregious examples. That one about Bury Town or Council having a specific funding project withheld if you don't comply with our political reasons. To hell with science. This is politics, right? It reminds me of the entire city of Manchester was going to have its budget withheld for the year. And there was a standoff, and it was kind of public. You know, the mayor or something like, I don't know if he's a mayor, the chief councillor in Manchester City was like, he stood his ground for a week, and it was I remember it being in the news, and then he gave in and said, okay, well, they were going with zoning, you remember?
Yeah.
Depending on the level of the region and what level it was at and stuff like that. And he wouldn't go along with it. And so they threatened to withhold the entire city's budget.
Yeah.
I think there were flagrant examples of politicizations along the way, you know, that no one could mistake.
I think the reason that it doesn't get traction amongst most people in the country when this information is revealed and people should draw the obvious consequences or conclusions from this information, the reason they don't draw those conclusions and aren't up in arms about it is because the vast majority of people still believe that they were in the middle of a serious, deadly pandemic.
Right.
And okay, it was difficult for government and they didn't know what to do. It was unprecedented, etc., etc. So they're not about to, you know, they're not really going to get out in the street and protest type thing and really call the government to task over this because they've all sorts of excuses. The biggest rationalization they have, I suppose, is the fact that they lived it personally and they still carry with them and will to their dying day that belief that they were in the middle of a serious deadly pandemic and all of their lives were potentially in danger. That's a big lie, the big con about this whole situation. Anybody with any sense at this point, and there are very few people with much sense out there, but anybody with any sense at this point who, you know, has looked into it and reviews the COVID era or the COVID years, and all of the data that's come out since then, you'd have to conclude that it was largely a nothing burger. That all of the fear and loathing that was going on was entirely manufactured and unjustified. Manufactured by the government and unjustified. It really was a nothing burger in that respect. It was something that in another context where the government didn't seize on this opportunity as they saw it to impose this kind of totalitarian control and strictures on society, if they weren't of that inclination, this would have passed like a blip on the health radar, and nothing would have come of it. But that's the world we live in now. So
another bad flu season or something.
Yeah. Anyway,
more on COVID origins. What's going on in the US with this? Do you want to cross COVID the pond? It's topic related.
Well, that's you have. Yes, do we have the actual? I have it here somewhere. Somebody. What was it? Who's it? Is it Grassley?
Josh Hawley.
Josh Hawley, sorry, yeah.
Republican senator from Missouri.
Yeah.
Sponsored a bill to compel the government to release all files it has on origins of COVID. And pass unanimously in the House. Who goes first? I guess the Senate, then the House, because it originated in the Senate. Astonishingly, 0 dissenting. So all Democrats, all Republicans unanimously passed in the House, 419 to nothing. This measure. It now goes to Biden to sign. Will he, won't he? It looks like he will. When you get unanimous, it means that the wind is sailing in a very specific direction.
Right.
And my suspicion immediately was, okay, so this is going to be a contrived act of political transparency
Mm-hmm.
with a view to shaping COVID origins as China did it.
Mm-hmm.
And in case anyone's in any doubt about that, Josh Hawley immediately fires off a letter addressed to Xi Jinping
Mm-hmm.
via the US ambassador. I'm not sure exactly how, but it was a published letter. He was proud of it. He posted it on his own bloody Twitter page. Short 2-paragraph letter in which he says basically, we're coming for you.
Yeah.
Um,
This is it here, actually. It was pretty. I mean, it does give an insight into how these people at this point are speaking, the level of diplomatic relations between the US and China. But here it is. It's Josh Hawley, representative, Republican representative, right?
yes.
For Missouri. Dear President Xi, today the U.S. House of Representatives followed the Senate in unanimously adopting my bill to declassify U.S. government intelligence on the origins of the COVID virus. I know you are keenly interested in this bill. Your own communist officials have written to my office demanding we renounce it in their usual lecturing, idiotic style. It's not very nice. But the bill will soon be law unless you can convince President Biden to veto it. Time is up. Come clean about your role in spreading COVID to the world. Now, that guy's delusional, obviously, but it's part of an attack on China. It's part of the spy balloon situation, like as we mentioned in the previous show, was deliberately concocted farce, essentially, by elements within the U.S. Washington establishment, deep state, etc., to make a big deal about this otherwise standard balloon that happened to go off course. They could have said, okay, it's no big deal, these happen all the time, but this one just went off course, no big deal, let's drop it. But they made an international incident over it. They shot it down. China saw that as evidence, clear evidence, a message to China that the people who actually hold the power, hold the reins of power in the US, were gunning for China. We're not friends anymore. Basically, they took that message quite clear, got that message pretty clear, and then it's followed up with this, which is another attack on China by trying to smear China internationally as definitively and forevermore. The historical record would show that China, it was responsible for the deadly global pandemic that beset the world and nearly destroyed economies, etc., which I have just pointed out was really a nothing burger. You see the level of nonsense and deception and bullshit that's going on here.
From the minute to the macro, yeah.
So yeah, that's obviously what's going on. But at the same time, in at the same time, you have hearings in Congress. I think it's in Congress where they brought in, health professionals and former CDC former CDC director of the CDC to talk about, his name's Redfield, Dr. Redfield, to talk about COVID. This is just from a few days ago. Have a listen there. It's 3 minutes.
As COVID-19 began to spread across the world, there were two competing hypotheses about the origin of this virus that needed to be vigorously explored. The first hypothesis is the possibility that COVID-19 infections in humans were the result of a spillover event from nature. This is a situation in which the virus naturally mutates and becomes more transmissible from one species to another, in this case from bats to humans via an intermediate species. This is what happened in previous outbreaks of SARS and MERS and earlier coronaviruses that emerged from bats and spread through an intermediate animal. The second hypothesis is the possibility that the virus evolved in a laboratory involved in gain-of-function research. This is a type of research in which scientists seek to increase the transmissibility or pathogenicity of an organism in order to better understand that organism and inform preparedness efforts and the development of countermeasures such as therapeutics and vaccines. Under this theory, COVID infected the general population after it was accidentally leaked from a lab in China. From the earliest days of the pandemic, my view was both theories about the origin needed to be aggressively and thoroughly examined. Based on my initial analysis of the data, I came to believe, and I still believe today, that it indicates that COVID-19 more likely was the result of an accidental lab leak than a result of a natural spillover event. This conclusion is based primarily on the biology of the virus itself, including the rapid high infectivity for human-to-human transmission, which would then predict the rapid evolution of new variants, as well as a number of other important factors, which also include the unusual actions in and around Wuhan in the fall of 2019, all of which I'm happy to discuss today. Even given the information that surfaced in the 3 years since the COVID-19 pandemic began, some have contended that there's really no point in investigating the origin of this virus. I strongly disagree. There is a global need to know what we are dealing with in COVID virus because it affects how we approach the problem to try to prevent the next pandemic.
Blah,
The
blah.
understanding.
Anyway,
Not a single person in the room reacted when he
yeah.
said that.
of course, people were banned for saying that. So that just is pointing out that, you know, and no one disagrees with it at this point. It's a done deal. Like, I mean, there's various US intel agencies and stuff. The Department of Energy was first to say that it was probably a lab leak. Of course, people are seizing on this and saying China did it. But here's Redfield again, because obviously the lab leak business implies gain of function research, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the connection between the Wuhan lab and the National Institute of Health and Dr. Fauci and all that kind of stuff. Here's just 30 seconds of a question by...
Dr. Fauci was affirmatively told in an email that NIAID had a monetary relationship with the Wuhan Institute through EcoHealth Alliance. He was told this in January 27th of 2020. Do you think that Dr. Fauci intentionally lied under oath to Senator Paul when he vehemently denied NIH's funding of gain-of-function research?
I think there's no doubt that NIH was funding gain-of-function research.
Is it likely that American tax dollars funded the gain-of-function research that created this virus?
I think it did, not only from NIH, but from the State Department, USAID, and from DOD.
I'm out of time.
Boom.
Thank you very much.
That's why they cut him out of the loop.
Right.
He was in a circular on the initial emails discussions in January 2020 with Fauci. He had a right to be, as former head of CDC. He's on like an advisory scientific committee. He's supposed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And then him and the three other guys he was with, also retired, were just cut out of the loop.
Yeah.
Probably by Fauci.
Mm-hmm.
Fauci's defense, I don't know if you want to hear it, but he's popped up on TV.
Yeah.
He's come out of retirement. He's probably crapping himself. His defense is that a lab leak could still be considered as coming from natural origins. He's trying to worm his way into both. A lab leak, he says, could be that someone was out in the wild, maybe looking for different types of viruses in bats, got infected, went into a lab, was being studied in a lab, then came out of the lab. And that's the definition of a lab leak. That's fucking awesome. You see what he's trying to do. He's trying to say, well, yeah, it could be a lab leak, but I'm still right. It's still natural. Yeah.
So if they're going to throw shade at China over this, saying that because it came out of Wuhan, then you have to allow for it. I mean, this guy, you know, is, what do you call him? Hawley? Is that his name?
Rand Paul, the senator?
No, the guy who sent the letter.
Josh Hawley.
Hawley. He said if he's going to throw shade at China for being the cause of COVID, that you spread COVID around the world, then we're going to have to look into the NIH funding of gain-of-function research in concert with Wuhan labs and all that kind of stuff. You know, that obviously has to be pursued right down to who actually was really responsible. You know, just because it supposedly came from Wuhan. Of course, we don't believe it came from Wuhan. Back in the day, if you remember, and when we were reporting at the time on it, it happened to coincide. The appearance of it in Wuhan happened to coincide with the International Military Games that were occurring in Wuhan in the fall, autumn,
September, October,
2019.
Yeah,
that's when it really first raised its ugly head, and the American military personnel were there, and there's all sorts of gain-of-function research being done on those kind of viruses in labs, military biowarfare labs in the US. So obviously, no one can say that no one really can say who created this.
No, it's
some person created it. Some group of people created it. Who did it?
It's to flesh that out. That hypothesis is quite an ask for people, because what you're positing is that somebody would have consciously set up the lab perhaps ahead of time. So yes, here's the money trail going from the NIH and the DoD to this lab in Wuhan.
Yeah.
Okay, that's no say that's as old as the Eco Health Alliance project, which is like 2018. Then the year of, or just prior, 2019 summer, someone goes, okay, so we've got this connection with Wuhan. The international military games are coming up. Let's send, you know what I mean? It's kind of multi-layered and complex and probably too much. If something like that happened, though, what a setup. What
Well,
a
I think-
freaking amazing setup, because China does look like bloody knife in the hand.
Yeah, of
There's
course.
little. That's why they respond to people like Hawley and stuff. Look, don't open this can of worms.
Yeah.
And then they sound defensive. And it's easy to explain to an American and maybe even more generally a Western audience. They do sound kind of guilty, don't they? When they want us to look at it too deeply.
Mhm.
But what the Chinese mean by that is, no, don't look at this too deeply, because we have evidence as well that will circle that bloody knife back to Fort Detrick in Maryland.
Yeah, well, nobody has any evidence is the thing, and that's the best.
Right.
The best crimes, are the ones where there's no evidence left for who did it. No, it disappears. It evaporates after the fact. After the deed is done, there's no traces left, and that seems to be the case here. There are no traces. There's no one going to prove. Who's going to prove that there was a leak from a Wuhan lab 3 years ago? More than 3 years ago. 3 years ago. Who's going to prove that? How are you going to prove that? You can't. So that's why it's just throwing shade. It's like whoever I say did it, then it's smearing. It's smear tactic. It's geopolitics. It's big powers calling each other names. Of course, America throwing most of the shade at everybody, as they always do. But I don't think it has anything to do with the Wuhan lab as a thing. I don't think it really has anything to do with Fauci. Like, gain of function research is a bad idea, always was a bad idea. And there was always a potential for it to go wrong and something to leak. You manufacture a more deadly strain of a virus and it gets out.
In fact, somebody found after it broke out in 2020, I remember a spate of articles people dug up going back over the years. There had been gain of function leaks before that.
Of course, yeah. But they were contained. And generally they have good controls in place to stop that from happening.
Were they contained, though? Or were they just not made a big issue out of at the time?
Yeah, because it didn't go
they
anywhere.
did go out in the general population
Yeah.
as blips.
Right.
Undetected.
Yeah, possibly.
No eyes were put on it.
Yeah, but even I'd say there's the different what do you call them, levels that these labs have are fairly good at containing, and people take it seriously when they're doing gain of function research. They take seriously the possibility of it leaking and making sure to the best of their ability not for a leak to happen. So that's why I don't think there was a leak in Wuhan. That's why I think Fauci, as evil as Fauci is, he should be jailed, but he's not because of all the lies that he's told. But he's not responsible for creating SARS-CoV-2. The Chinese aren't responsible. I think it's very simple, and it fits with the general geopolitical climate in which we're in and have been in for quite some time, where the US is gunning for China, and this fits within that. Where you drop a gain of functioned or a manufactured virus, effectively edited or virus on China, and just cause chaos, basically, then pump it up as this major deadly pandemic and allow governments to go full totalitarian arseholes on it. And then ultimately the end result is you blame it on China. You can spin it, so you can blame China. I mean, the very dropping of it in China. I think my perspective is that it came from the US somewhere, was manufactured in the US, was brought to China, dropped in China, and everything else is gravy after that,
Mm-hmm. This, more than weather balloons, is going to be the thing that greases the wheels to war with China, in whatever form that takes. Economic, undoubtedly. The headlines this week last 2 weeks are insane. One in Australia, did you see this one? About preparing for war with China. The Age. Don't know what that stands for. Big paper in Australia. Big splash. War with China. Of course, none of them will ever mention COVID, but COVID has done its job already. Most Westerners do associate China. I mean, we have Trump to thank for that, the Kung Fu virus. Australia must prepare for threat of China war. Graphic, red alert.
Yeah, just change that to Ukraine must prepare for threat of Russia war. You know, in the Western press, that's coming from America basically. That's the U.S. government's catchphrase there in that headline. They'd like to, if I mean, it's not gonna happen, I don't think, because they're not able to do it. But in the same way, the best they can get is the same as they got from Ukraine, which is you try and fight China, proxy war, but fight China to the last Taiwanese. You're not going to be able to pull in Australia or Vietnam or Japan, etc., etc. They're not that stupid. They're not able to do it anyway. In the same way,
or Japan, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think so. In the same way, all they could do was get Ukrainians to fight and die for America's geopolitical goals. They haven't got
and 20,000.
Haven't got officially though. You know,
officially
what I mean? They throw them in, but they haven't got in the way that like that title there says Australia must prepare for China war. That's
as if Australians are going to be. Yeah, no, they won't.
A full mobilized war
of Australians
against China. It's not going to happen, right? No. But that's what they'd like to do. So, and meanwhile, Xi got reappointed for a third 5-year term yesterday by 2,952 votes to 0.
Rigged.
That's free and fair election. Where's Trump? Where's Trump when you need him? It was a stolen election.
Can we mention something that we missed from 2 weeks ago? Put this one up. This is the first. If you remember our last show, we discussed the papers published on the Chinese Foreign Ministry's office that were like full on, no holds barred. It was the first time China had in any official capacities condemned and judged U.S. policy in both detail and in general back through the last century. Well, this is the first time that I recall a head of state in China giving it to the U.S. no holds barred kind of thing. A headline here: U.S. seeking to contain China. President Xi.
Duh.
Yeah, I know. Duh, we know that, but still,
Americans
they've said the quiet part out loud for the first time.
Well, the Americans have said it out loud as well, more or less. You know what I mean?
Well,
China's our greatest threat. It's
officially they all said, well, one China policy. We acknowledge Taiwan as the official line is not
we're at war with
Biden
China.
is not going to say we're trying to contain China. Well, not yet.
Yeah.
He's about to probably.
Everybody else is saying it.
Xi says Western countries led by the US have implemented all-round containment, encirclement and suppression of China, which has brought unprecedented challenges to our development. Scroll down, please.
Sound more like Putin every day.
Xi normally refrains from targeted criticism of the US. True.
Now after the balloon, man.
Right. Do you think that was the Rubicon crossed on this issue?
Well, yeah, it made it clear to them, like I said, that
Xi also said, no, not Xi, Xin. I think this is his foreign minister. Yeah, Foreign Minister Qin Gang. If the US does not hit the brakes but continues to speed down the wrong path, no amount of guardrails can prevent derailing, and there will surely be conflict and confrontation. Kind of fight and talk, which is unusual for China, but that's where we are. They've crossed this threshold.
Mm-hmm.
Cutting to the chase, though, you've already said a war is unlikely, right? Proxy situation, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's clear now when you go back to the whole Huawei thing, the TikTok thing. Yeah. If you remember the Huawei case, the allegation was by U.S. prosecutors that the specific crimes were committed by Huawei CEO in flouting anti-Iran sanctions. Mm-hmm. So the U.S. is saying, no, your companies made these deals with Iran. They're against our sanctions, therefore we're sanctioning you, and it led to the imprisonment, temporarily freaking abduction of the Huawei founder's daughter in Canada, right? Well, that was always a fig leaf, obviously. What we see now is it's beginning to be stated a lot more clearly. We're sanctioning the purpose of these sanctions in the broadest strokes, is to suppress Chinese access to the free markets, because we want our companies to be the first that people go to. We're still number one, baby, in all sectors of industry. Well, also last week, the one time, I don't think he's the current ambassador, one time ambassador, US ambassador to China, was on NBC boasting about how, China is not, we're still number one in the region, blah, blah, blah. Are they though? There's been a serious sea change in the background in the last, 10 years. This is a report from an Australian institute called ASPI, some kind of think tank, military tech think tank. The US is this goes to the title of our show. The US is in complete denial. They still scream that we're number one, baby, while sanctioning friends and allies from doing business with China, in the hope that they are forced or induced, like we've seen Europe energy wise and tech wise with respect to Russia, to look west to the US for markets, for both production and a market into which to sell what they produce. This is a report. China leads US in tech that matters most. If you scroll down, it's like it looks at the 40 top industry sectors or 44 key technologies. China is now leading the world in 37 out of 44 key technologies, including hypersonic missiles, AI, drones, electric batteries, according to this Australian research report. So even when they crow about how we're still number one, it's objectively not the case according to the metrics their own allies are used to using. It's just not true anymore. And maybe they see those reports and they deny them, or maybe they see them and they go, okay, let's just keep pretending it is the case.
But and not only that, but I mean, on the diplomatic front, let's say there was an event just yesterday, I'm sure it was known behind the scenes, but it came out of the blue, that was to do with Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Oh yeah.
Pretty significant. If you Iran and Saudi Arabia agreeing to restore ties with the China brokered talks. This has obviously been going on behind the scenes, and Iran and Saudi Arabia 7 years ago, they cut ties with each other, and have obviously it's been an issue with Yemen over those years, a kind of proxy war going on in Yemen, and basically it served the US, and in that the US had its long-term ally Saudi Arabia in the Middle East and other Gulf states against Iran, Syria, Iraq, up until Iraq to some extent still, but of course that's why they invaded Iraq, and that's why they're occupying a bigger part of Syria than Russia is of Ukraine right now. But no one talks about it. Right. It's the level of like hypocrisy is just bizarre. It's because we're doing it, it's fine. It's the old refrain: because we're doing it, it's fine. But anybody else who does it, it's evil. It's war crimes. It's unconscionable. The whole world must stand up against this, despite the fact that America is doing exactly the same thing. But it's all for freedom and democracy, right? It's just bullshit. Anybody who I can't understand how anybody is naive enough and childish enough to go with that, or stupid enough to just to go with that version of how the world works and how the world should work, and how that's fine, and how America is always right, and everybody else who America says is wrong is by definition wrong. It's just like, people are so dependent on official, government missives or statements about what's going on in the world that they really don't need their own brains at all. I mean, they don't use their own brains at all, even to a small extent. They've no ability, no inclination to think a bit critically about it, to be nuanced, to be, it's that's what we're up against.
They are
always have been.
They are. It's an onslaught what they have to hear. They hear all the time. Russia and Ukraine, bad, but they just hear it nonstop day
Yeah.
to day. They don't even hear, and when they do, it's mentioned in passing.
Right.
There's no constant bombardment that the US is in northeast Syria illegally. US is in Syria illegally. They don't have the bombardment.
Right.
If there was the requisite bombardment, I'm telling you, they would be thinking the same thing.
Yeah. So it's all about information, which is why information is such a big hot topic these days, right? Increasingly so, and
Yeah.
clamping down on information.
And who shouts it loudest? And
Yeah.
mostest.
Anyway, that deal is interesting. China
Yeah,
directly,
Israel's shitting itself.
Yeah, Israel not happy about it. America obviously not happy about it. Very worried about the Middle East going east, basically. And obviously Saudi Arabia is fundamental to the petrodollar and all that kind of stuff. It's all pointing in the direction of American dominance of the world. Largely, because of the dominance of the dollar. It's all going, south. It's all going bye-bye. Progressively, bit by bit. America's fighting it every step of the way, but that's where it's going, and they're very concerned about it. And that's why, like you were saying, information is where it's at these days. And you actually had that, the Twitter files on Matt Taibbi and others who released or wrote up the Twitter files over the past month or two, and they've been Matt Taibbi and the other guy, Schellenberger, two of the guys who basically released the information on Twitter, have been up in front of Congress at the request of Republicans to find out what the Dems were doing, what the FBI, the Democrat Washington establishment-run FBI, and all this myriad of other agencies and pseudo-government agencies, all who were involved in suppressing content on Twitter across the board on every topic that didn't suit what the official government message was, that didn't or went against the official government message. They were suppressed over and over again, like people saying, even they admitted that some of the things in some of the emails that have been released, these groups were saying, okay, technically what these people are saying is true. This was in relation to vaccines. They're technically saying what that they're citing factual information about what different countries are doing about vaccines and how there's questions about vaccines, but this could cause vaccine hesitancy. Therefore, we need to suppress it. We need to suppress the truth. But how is it higher good when you're talking about legitimate concerns about a vaccine that could inform the debate or the questions around vaccines and whether or not vaccines will be suitable for everybody? And maybe they're dangerous for some people. Maybe some people shouldn't have them. No, shut that down, because that will, the higher truth there, the greater good is selling vaccines. That's what it has to result down to. You're by talking about potential problems with vaccines, at least for some people, is going to cut into our market share or our sales of vaccines. That has to be what it is, because why else would you have a problem with that? Surely it's not against anyone's interest to say, let's look at these vaccines. Okay, good for some people, not good for others. No. Shut that down. Why? What's the only reason you could have for that?
The only objective reason, but the reason that you would have been given all through 2021 and into last year as well by people was, shut up, take the damn vaccine so we can all get back to normal.
Yeah.
The psychological pressure they were under to pressure everyone else was unbearable. They don't have enough moral courage to stand up against that.
Check out the mental gymnastics that, as a result of these guys being in front of Congress, like Matt Taibbi, and talking about the censorship going on, like the state-sanctioned censorship. Look at the way this guy, a Democrat from Ohio, Landsman, listen to the way he spins it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to ensure that this debate is placed in an honest and important historical context. In the 1930s and early 40s, Hitler needed America out of his war. He used propaganda in this country to divide us and to keep us out of his war in Europe. Pro-Hitler propaganda was all over the country, and it reached this body. We know this now. Members of Congress were in on it. As a Jew, this is frighteningly similar to what is happening today. 1 year ago, a new foreign adversary invaded Eastern Europe. Putin, like Hitler, wants us divided. and isolated from his war. We must be clear-eyed about pro-Putin propaganda and who and why some intentionally and others unintentionally are promoting his will. Why are we being asked to ban American officials from trying to stop propaganda from foreign adversaries like Putin? Why are some proposing we leave Syria, which Putin wants?
Gates.
Why is the call to abandon Ukraine continuing to emerge from some members? Remember, Hitler did this. He used Americans to spread his propaganda, and it cost millions their lives. Putin is doing the same thing. I urge my colleagues to vote no on H.R. 140 and to call out any and all attempts to promote Putin's propaganda and will.
So you may think, what's that got to do with Matt Taibbi and the Twitter files and censorship on social media? The bill that he's urging members to vote against is H.R. 140, which prohibits federal government employees from censoring or promoting censorship of speech on social media. And that bill was brought up specifically in relation to the Twitter files and the FBI and various other US government intel agencies and their associated groups that spun off them from censoring speech. I mean, these people were engaged
from sending
in
lists to Twitter and say we want all these accounts muted
across the board on anything. Now he brings up he's trying to focus it on well, this would stop government agencies like the FBI and stuff from getting social media companies to censor speech on. We can't stop the government from getting social media companies to censor speech on social media, because that would prevent them from censoring speech that is essentially proxy speech by Putin. And Putin is Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
So we're back in the 1930s Germany here, and we're facing a world war, basically, right? This is global. This is America's under threat. The West, Europe, is under threat from an evil dictator. And the only reason that FBI, members of the FBI, at the behest of the Biden government or the Washington establishment, censored people on Twitter from speaking truth about COVID, for example, was because that allows them to censor the new Hitler as well. So if you take that away, we have to be allowed to censor whatever we want because Hitler is what I'm saying.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have to be allowed to censor the truth because Hitler. That's what that guy's saying.
Yeah.
And he says, and also I'm a Jew, by the way, so therefore you have to believe what I say.
Yeah. You can't criticize me now. Or you're anti-Semitic.
I mean, Jesus Christ. Like the mental gymnastics there, like that guy is delusional. And he's like representing how many thousands, hundreds of thousands of American citizens in Congress and government, and he's the best they've got. He's standing.
Well, he's not. He's representing the war party.
His brain is mush, though.
It is mush. And he also referenced Syria. I think he was referring to Matt Gates's noble attempt to have a bill and discussion in Congress about. He references why are US troops in Syria?
Some members who are doing this. They're the ones who are across the board. They're saying the FBI cannot censor social media. We need to get out of Syria. We need to stop funding Ukraine. And they're like, holy shit, you want to give. You're doing what Putin wants.
You're giving Putin everything. Yeah, but this you're getting a flashback to that. I'm only getting a flashback to 2016. This all comes back to. They began with that issue, but since Russiagate and Putin stole our election, it's become Putin everything. Someone on Twitter collected as many Putin did this article headlines as you could find over the last 5-6 years, and there's like a list of 50 topic areas. You name it.
Putin did everything.
Putin did everything.
Yeah. When do you stop believing people like that who blame one person for everything? This bugbear, this like bête noire who everything that I don't like is blamed on this guy. Everything that's going wrong in the world, everything that I'm doing wrong is his fault. Anything that goes wrong for me is his fault. It's never my fault. Here's an example of also. I mean, this is just one. This headline kind of in a way sums up everything that I've heard from Western media about the Russian invasion over the past year. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
it's coalesced in this headline.
Yeah.
Russian victory in Ukraine. Let's say, could you say Russian victory in Ukraine will be a defeat for Putin?
Yeah.
Victory is defeat. Defeat is victory. Winning is losing. Black is white. Up is down. Because it's very complicated, and you don't understand what I'm talking about. It's very nuanced, and people like you, Neil, with the little brain of the great unwashed, you can't get it. So you just have to believe what I say. Okay, so Russian victory in Ukraine is defeat. Okay. That's good. Okay, thank you. I now understand. I'm going to tell everybody I know that that's what's going on. So whenever actually Russia wins in Ukraine, it'll be, yep, take that, Putin. That'll learn you.
Yeah. I don't know if it's that
We led Putin into a victory in Ukraine. Mwahaha.
There was a whole spate of them, and one of them said something like, yeah, they're winning in Bakhmut, but you know, the ratio of Russian dead to Ukraine is vast. They took, in fact, probably the objective ratio of 7-1, and they just flipped it. They just flat out lied and said there's 40,000 Russian bodies piled up in the cities, not the other way around. Then, of course, there was the whole shovels thing. They're winning with shovels.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they don't have enough ammo. And finally, to kind of, how do they spin it philosophically? They said something like, maybe it was a Guardian version of that story. It said something like, yeah, they're winning in Bakhmut, but the thing, they're not like us, the Russians. They're winning, and
in a loosey kind of way.
Yeah, they're not a democracy. So any fighters who are too scared to keep going forward, even though it's suicidal, if they get back to their safe lines in defense in the rear, they get hit with a sledgehammer by enforcers.
Right, yeah, because that was a fake.
They just threw that out there. No source, no, we're citing nothing. It was just included. And I was like, okay, well, if anyone's going to believe that, they're going to believe literally anything, you know?
Yeah, I've heard all sorts of outrageous stuff, like 1.5 million Russians dead. 1.5 million.
Right.
They said that the ratio was 15-1, and they admitted that, like, as last year, that what do you call her, von der bin Leyen has said she admitted 100,000 Ukrainians dead. So they said, yeah, but the Russian ratio is 15 times that. So they're basically saying 1.5 million Russians died.
Yeah.
Anyway, but it's like it's one thing to come from some naff warshole on social media or something like that, but you're hearing this from politicians. So, and I can understand, like, people listening to that, they go, yeah, shovels, or in the media, you know, Russians are fighting with shovels, from a mainstream media reporter legitimately saying that they're fighting with shovels, and politicians saying the same thing. And it's like, you can't just go, oh yeah, that's just silly, you know. A lot of people look at that and go, that's just silly, you know. They put it at the level of just the average person in the street or in a bar or something, spouting off, giving his off-the-cuff hot take, right?
Yeah.
But you can't do that with politicians. You know what I mean? You can't just apply the same blasé or whatever dismissive attitude to an obviously outrageous hyperbole type statement from a politician or from the leader of a Western government. But that's what they're doing. I mean, how do you deal with that? You need to have a different take on that level of lies and bullshit coming from your government officials.
Yeah.
Because it has implications for the future of your country when those are the people who are running it. Did you see, and also more stuff came out this week, the videos, like Tucker Carlson putting out a bunch of videos about the insurrection, Star Trek insurrection, the Borg that invaded on January 6th.
From Moscow.
What do you call him? Jacob, yeah, from Moscow. Jacob Chansley, shaman guy, video of him being escorted through the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And he got 41 months. What's that? 4 years, 3.5 years. 3.5 years jail term. He's in jail right now for but there's loads of video of him being escorted through, of him actually standing outside saying, listen, telling people not to go in. Don't go in here, you know, blah, blah. And, you know, his claim all along was that he just went in to kind of like, he's a bit of a LARPer, you know, but he was caught up in the moment. I'm not saying there wasn't.
To purify or make sacred the Senate with a prayer. And he did. He succeeded.
So he was just used as a political kind of patsy or a tool, basically, to score political points.
Yeah.
So he's a political prisoner by definition. That
Definitely.
guy getting that
Him
amount
and all
of
the
time.
others. Yeah.
So yeah.
That I'm just a passing comment on that. Yeah, it's another interesting thing that this so-called MAGA Congress is having effect. So, Speaker of the House McCarthy said he would get them as part of his deal with Gates when he was finally sworn in January as Speaker, and he did, and he leaked them to Tucker Carlson's team.
Yeah, there's still some truth. I mean, you'd have to hope. It's good to see it that it at a time when the level of lies and deception and subterfuge is at such a high level, at such a height that there's still some scope for pushback and people to say, and for it to be officially recognized that what that person is saying or what this narrative that they've concocted is false. It usually happens after the fact. They drop it, like the January 6th insurrection, COVID, China, Russia, Putin, Hitler, Ukraine, all that kind of stuff. In the moment they put out the message and it sticks, but then within a certain period of time, because the lie is so egregious, there has to be some. I mean, it could be much worse, where there's no exposure at all.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I think the time period as well is shortening.
Yeah.
As the meme goes, on social media, the difference between conspiracy theory and fact is about 6 months,
Right.
and shortening.
Right.
So you had three or 4 years between the beginning of Russiagate and Mueller's report saying actually no, and then you had just 2 years from January 6th to now.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just it's so egregious, and they have a perennial problem, which is that no matter how confused or ideologically convinced or scared or whatever the majority population is, they still staff most positions in a media company or in government and so on, and they're not psychos.
Right. Yeah.
Like the woman who wrote the book for Hancock. She's like,
there's some
moral dilemma. Something in her went, public interest. I don't care if he sues me.
Right.
So,
but someone else. I mean, people wonder about like the whole thing about 9/11. Back in the day, 9/11 was the pushback on any 9/11 conspiracy theories was that there's so many people would have had to been involved in the cover up that it's just not plausible. But I mean, you see now how human psychology works, you can get away with large scale deceptions, and establish a narrative that is globally accepted, and it's entirely false, and it becomes part of history, except for a few people who have a bit of sense. Zelensky, there's some talk about Zelensky going to the Oscars. I think the Oscars are tonight, is that right? Or the last night? Don't know, tonight or last night anyway. Zelensky, they wanted Zelensky.
I don't keep up on such things.
No, me neither. Zelensky wanted Zelensky to show up at the Oscars. It'd be another place for it to shoo him in there and say Slava Ukraini and keep sending your money, blah 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 blah. But apparently he's not allowed to go to the Oscars,
or to speak remotely, more likely, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Of
course, he had to be there, but he guess why they said no?
Because the committee hates Sean Penn.
No, go down. I think it's there. The Oscars producer expressed concerns last year that Hollywood was only giving Ukraine so much attention because people affected by the war were mainly white.
Let me read that again. The U.S. outlet was told Oscars producer expressed concern last year.
He is reported to have argued that previous wars involving people of color hadn't received the same attention. So therefore, we can't be supporting this.
Oh, right.
Zelensky.
So for equity reasons, Zelensky cannot speak.
Hoisted.
Oh, my God. I wonder if someone's being cute, though, and they actually don't want to give the guy airtime.
I would say they're serious.
Wow.
And check out this. This is one
the
other
woke
thing.
Circus. Each its own.
This is a headline from the Washington Times or Washington Post. New York Times, sorry. New York Times. You saw this, right? Latest update. The truth finally about Nord Stream 2.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, no one believes that.
It was a pro-Ukrainian group sabotage pipelines. U.S. officials say. Now, Zelensky just recently has come out and said,
It's
hang on a
lies.
minute,
Okay.
they weren't Ukrainians. I don't want you saying that the Ukrainians did this. The Ukrainians didn't blow up the pipeline, because he's a bit worried, and he's saying, no, they weren't Ukrainians who did this. So we're left with a pro-Ukrainian group that wasn't Ukrainian. Give me a short list of pro-Ukrainians that aren't Ukrainian.
It's such bullshit. They've since given more details that there was a Greek registered yacht
Just
that sailed by
Yeah.
and dropped the bomb.
check it. This is a German, I think it's German defense minister or something, or some German lady. Anyway,
Wimmer.
Was nicht klar zu sein scheint, ist die Identität dieser Personen.
pause it there.
Es wurden 2 Reisepässe gefunden, die alle
what doesn't seem to be clear is the identity of the people, as 2 passports were found, but these were professionally forged. Therefore, there's a connection to the Ukraine, because the company that rented the boat, but no clarity who's hiding behind these persons. So they found passports. Does that remind you of anything? The old passport placement that identifies the purpose. Yeah.
9/11.
The burning passports in 9/11. I don't know if they found them at the bottom of the Baltic, like waterproof passports or something.
Surely
But
not.
maybe they found them on the boat. But anyway, there you go. It's the old rehash the old passport thing as proof of your claim that these people did this thing.
But there's sufficient skepticism in Germany. Don't have the link, sorry, but it's reported in Bild newspaper, their biggest tabloid. The Andromeda sailing yacht, according to the government German investigation, may have been involved in the sabotage of Nord Stream. But it does not appear to have a special mechanism for submerging a large batch of explosives underwater.
No, I thought all standard sailing yachts had that mechanism. No, shit, I'm not going to rent any more yachts.
It's horseshit. Ukraine did Nord Stream, and no, I didn't save it for the show, but there's a clip. Seymour Hersh is doing quite a few, informal podcasts, interviews with people, and he was in the middle of one when someone had the breaking news, and he said, "What? Can you repeat that?" And he just burst out laughing. He said, "That's hilarious."
Yeah. Economy. People on social media are scared about the economy because of SBB, Silicon Valley Bank.
Well, this is kind of breaking news. Yeah, this weekend, Silicon Valley Bank. Never heard of it before. Apparently, it's a big deal, though.
20th biggest bank, had something like, I don't know how many billion. It apparently had a lot of companies, 1,500 companies, deposits from 15 Silicon Valley startups.
Yeah.
Particularly for kind of climate change companies, like renewable energy, that kind of thing.
Companies that don't actually do anything.
All going a bit sour, yes. So a bit of a run on that bank. It's pretty much folded. There's another bank. Talk about another bank in California. People queuing up outside to get their money out of it. I can't remember the name of it. That's another small bank. It's kind of interesting because, like I was saying to you earlier, that it's basically symptomatic. It should be seen as a sign of a problem with the American economy. Because it relates directly to inflation. This bank, in a general basic sense, this bank got into difficulties because of interest rate hikes in the past few months by the Fed, and they
to control inflation
to try and bring inflation down. They increase interest rates, and this company had a lot of investments in basically federally secured mortgage or federal backed, government backed or federal mortgage backed securities, i.e. fixed investments that give you a fixed interest rate. So they bought big into these when they were low interest rates, and then interest rates go up, and then they have a problem. And they didn't see that coming, and it was signaled by the Fed like this was going to happen. So it's bizarre. There was some kind of serious mismanagement or whatever, where they really, were exposed and didn't take action in advance when they really should have. But
there's conspiracy theories going on about it already.
Yeah,
the links between current managers of SVB and their roles back in the day in 2008, Lehman Brothers, Deutsche Bank, and others.
Yeah.
It's been taken into administration super, super quick, though, within hours on Friday. Apparently, that's unusual on a couple of fronts. They usually wait till the end of the day to see how the stock settled.
Yeah.
They came in right away. It's now, it's collapsed. I suppose it's what us laymen will call bankrupt.
Right. And of course, it ties back. I mean, this is where you tie it back to the state of the American economy and inflation. Okay, there's inflation around the world, but inflation in the US and to a large extent in Western European countries, but particularly in the US, inflation is always a result of the government printing presses working too fast, too hard.
Overspending.
Printing a shitload of money when there isn't, when there aren't enough products or enough production to match the amount of money being pumped into the economy, right? And they have to pump money into the economy to keep the American, funny money, to keep the American dream going, right? So, it links back to that. And of course, what's the cause of inflation? Well, go back to inflation started going through the roof type thing. Well, increasing because of COVID, and then more recently because of America's foreign policy in Russia and sanctions against Russia, screwing over Europe, blowing up Nord Stream 2, cutting Europe off from cheap Russian gas. And it links directly to we talked about in a previous show about Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which doesn't seem to have a lot to do with reducing inflation. It's basically about attracting European companies now that they can't get access to cheap Russian gas, attracting renewable companies focused on renewable tech and products, bringing them over to America to provide that productivity to balance out the inflation, because inflation is basically a problem of pumping out too much money and not having the productivity to back it up, to match it or to justify it. So what do? Let's screw over Europe, pull as much of their industry over to America as possible, and also selling, American gas to Europe, but also pulling European companies into America with this freebie scheme called the Inflation Reduction Act, where you get massive subsidies for green energy companies.
Yeah,
it's a desperate attempt,
Oh, it's crazy, isn't it? And it just stuns me that she did it again last week. Von der Leyen went to Washington after Scholz the week before, and they both said, yes, sir, yes, sir.
How humiliating. Someone just blew up your energy pipelines and you go over there to kiss ass. I mean, and it's disgusting. But the thing about SVB is, and the whole economic situation, whether or not anything will come of it, we'll find out tomorrow, because people are talking about wait until the stock market's open or the banks open tomorrow, because the Fed apparently is having a...
they're not waiting
The
around.
Fed is having an emergency meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, not only in Britain as well. Can you put that one up? Yesterday, Saturday, and today, Sunday, the head of the Bank of England, Sunak, so Prime Minister, and heads of industry are meeting right now to prevent contagion in the UK. So this could be it, people.
Or maybe not.
This is the largest bank to fail since 2008.
Right.
The value of all the other big ones in the US, well, their market value plummeted last week. And it's you said it's a sign of the times, a symptom. Another symptom is that nothing changed.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing changed from what were the lessons learned from 2008? Double down.
Yeah. Look at that side headline, or Rishi Sunak has electricity grid upgraded to heat his private pool. It's getting farcical, at this point, the level of corruption. Show us the comments, Scotty. We saw something maybe not the comments in the article, the comments on the chat. Somebody said it's interesting that the bankruptcy happens a few days after the release of the January 6th videos. Maybe a way to distract people's attention from that. Yeah. Well, it'd be a super big distraction if they actually go with it and cause a major economic collapse, banking crisis, let's say.
Sometimes it's hard to tell a plan apart from a snafu. On German companies relocating to the US, an astonishing number. A survey in Germany revealed that 1 in 10 German firms, major firms anyway, the ones that could do it feasibly, are thinking of relocating to the USA. 1/10. A tenth. That includes BASF, not their entire operation, but chunks of it.
Well, it's hollowing out the European.
A huge German steel manufacturer closed shop last week.
And it's a bad idea going to America if there's some kind of economic disaster coming, or some other food war coming
For
down the
some
pipe.
reason, these people have in their heads that the US dollar,
It's gonna
the
be there
full
forever.
faith in the credit of the US dollar is
It's
undiminished.
their god.
It's bonkers.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But I'm gonna call quits there because I have to go and do something.
Something really important.
Yeah, I
Okay.
got really important stuff to do.
Joe's business.
So anyway,
Joe has business to take
I got
care of.
business to take care of. So yeah, I think we covered it all pretty quick. That's what we should do that every week. Just
But we
a
missed
quick-
stuff.
What did we miss? Go on, give me. You got 30 seconds.
Russia firing off more Kinzhals.
Yeah,
In
we'll be doing
Ukraine.
hypersonic missiles. Boom.
Well, we have to do. They did one before last March.
Mm.
Just last week they did 6, and the shit. The coverage of it in the West is so schizo. It's like, yeah, they did it, but they're not really hypersonic.
They're losing.
Well, we don't know. They say they are. We're not sure.
Yeah.
They're just Iskander missiles souped up a bit, fired
Yeah.
from the air. Meh. But then inside this article that's saying it's a nothing burger, but actually maybe it's scary. A schizo coverage.
They can't
They
help
quote the
themselves.
Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, so the Pentagon's top, the guy who's supposed to be making sure the U.S. Armory is still number one, baby. Quote, "We have never been in production of hypersonic missiles," Pentagon Acquisition Chief Bill LaPlante said at an industry conference this year. Quote, "What the hell have we been doing for 7 years?"
Mhm.
You've been going woke.
Yeah,
That's the problem. That's a big part of the problem.
go woke, go broke.
Okay, so next week, stock market crash.
Yeah, we'll be talking about the stock market crash next week and what's happened in the week since then. So hold on to your horses. Strap yourself in. Things might be getting a bit rocky, a bit crazy, or they might not at all. But whatever happens, we'll be letting you know what we think about it. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting. Don't forget to smash all the buttons. We'll be back next week with another show. Until then, have a good one. See ya.
Bye, all.
Can't stop the signal now.